The What to Read Next podcast helps you build a TBR of each your favorite books. In each episode, Lauren and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show's for you. Hi, Scarlett. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, thank you.
I'm so excited to chat with you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
What is there to tell? I'm like, what do I say? I am a USA Today bestselling author as of like a week ago, which was a huge dream come true. And I write fantasy romance. I'm probably best known for my Hades and Persephone retelling, Touch of Darkness. But most recently, I think, I could say I'm known for this vampire retelling or this vampire mythology romance. So King of Battle and Blood, which just came out. So yeah. It's been a ride.
It has been a ride, but it's such a good ride. Like I am dying. So as I was telling you, I was like, I have so many questions that you're not going to answer to me. Let's talk about the King of Battle and Blood. Like, where's the elevator pitch and why should your listeners pick that one up?
Oh, it's so funny because I do this all the time, but then I always want to try and change it up because I say the same thing all the time. King of Battle and Blood is about a princess named Isolde who is basically forced into, I wouldn't say an arranged marriage. It's definitely like a contract marriage, though, to save her kingdom with Adrian, who is the king of Rebecca, and he's the first vampire born of this land. And so she agrees to marry him to save her kingdom. And she's essentially, thrust into this world. And she sort of realizes that her view of the world was very narrow and there's a lot more going on in the greater scheme of things. And it's kind of, the first book is sort of all about discovering that journey. And I always like to say, like, the emotional arc is this woman who thought her identity was going to be one thing and it turns out being a completely different thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it took us in a ride. Like it went from one thing, an idea. I was like, okay, I don't want to get married to anyone. All right, I'll marry you. And then be like a whole different landscape of things, and like even the conflicts. So like she was going through, she was like just uncovering them. Like as a reader, I was just like uncovering with her journey and like how she was a part of this world and what her role is going to be.
Yeah, that's why it was so important. I think I was asked a lot if it was going to be written from multiple points of view. And it was so important that this book be written from one point of view because of that element. So I'm very pleased with just how it turned out. And I know, I think people will fall on two sides of this fence. Like this book will either be like predictable for you or not. And there's no middle ground, which is fine. It is what it is, but I kind of knew that going in. I love it. I think there's just, there was just so much, and there's so much more that I think, people will get to discover about this world in the subsequent books. So it was I always like, it was a very good intro book. It was a very good foundation for, a greater series. So
yeah. So what can we expect for the next couple books here? Just give us a teaser, and then when are the books going to be published? That's actually more important. When am I going to die?
We're still kind of hashing out when Queen of Myth and Monsters, which is the second book, will what its publication date will be. But I think, overall the series will explore what it's like to be sort of this morally gray character. Like it will take you on a journey to what it truly means to be morally gray. And I think so many elements, so many things in history and now we all have that perspective that our kingdom or our country is the good country, right? Or whatever. Maybe we don't, but typically and so it's kind of the exploration of what do you have to do to survive in a world where like everything that you your survival depends on like making some really hard decisions. So I think a lot of revenge and a lot of blood, hence the title. I really, from what I really want from the series is to watch Isolde and Adrian be like a true king and queen, like true equals. So everything they do, is sort of how did they become powerful. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. I'm speaking very distantly about it because I'm not writing it right now. So sometimes it's hard for me to like put into words like what those will look like. But I ultimately, I think it's a bigger battle too than just like what we see like in the world of like Cordova. I think this is sort of like a battle with the gods as well. So I'm curious to see like how our two main goddesses and the like minor goddesses kind of come into play, and if they do. So I'm very curious myself because I'm working on a game of Retribution right now, so I just got my brain back into like that world and everything. So,
oh my gosh.
But I hope you guys love it.
I am loving it. So I'm like ready for whatever books you write. I'm like, okay, this is an Audubon author. Like you just like you got me in a place of sense of like as someone who's like newish to the fantasy world, like the world building and even paranormal, even just like the whole vampire stuff. I was like, it was engaging enough that I was like, I just like uncovering the world building was not as intimidating as it could be in other books. And at the same time, there was an element of like there's romance, there's high heat, there's intrigue, there's political stuff, there's a lot of conversation about like how you manage, going to war or not going to war, and like, what it means to be a vampire and like all those different things. And so it was a 5-star read.
I'm so glad.
So I have a question because I write your authors now, and so you did a lot of research for vampires. Like, so this was not. So what was the research process for you to look like? And that getting to figure out what type of vampire Adrian was going to be, and this community.
Yeah, I remember struggling with just deciding what my vampires were going to look like, and I do think they're a little more traditional in the sense of what we know as a vampire, but at the basis of like vampires, it's this idea that vampires are a manifestation of every culture's fears. So vampires look different depending on where you live in the world, and they have different names. Like, I brought all of those. I brought a lot of those types of vampiric monsters into this world because in this world, I think what these people fear most is being overpowered and being being taken control of. And so that's what Adrian ultimately, the ultimate like vampire, is able to do. And I just thought that was very intriguing, like the sense that vampires, represent our deepest fears. And I think in some ways, the reason we're so captivated by monsters and vampires is that they show an element of humanity that we like to pretend doesn't exist, like kind of that morally gray element of humanity that we like to pretend doesn't exist. So I think we get to watch like what if we were given like these powers and this ability to do sort of whatever we wanted, like what would we do with it? It's kind of like the movie Purge, if you're given one night to like kill people, would you do it? And I think that's kind of what vampires sort of represent. So I thought that was very interesting. And I did, it's always hard to talk about vampires without talking about Vlad III, Vlad the Impaler, who is actually a national hero in Romania. And so I think, you want to be careful with how you sort of adapt this idea of Dracula, especially considering like that's not really Dracula and Vlad. Like they go hand in hand in literature, but they don't go hand in hand in history, obviously. And so what I did with the idea of Vlad, because I thought he was such an interesting character, and given the environment he was born into, and his past and how he conquered. He is like the ultimate morally gray hero. Like, he is someone who did what he had to do, and he, you either like him or you hate him. And so I used the model of his like hero's journey, what I see as his hero's journey, for Adrian. So, Adrian took on that role of conqueror, and he's seen as a hero in his world of Rebecca. And so I sort of like pulled just from those. It's not a generic hero's journey, but I think it's one that it's a morally gray hero's journey is what it is. And I thought that was very interesting. And so that was the element of Vlad that I pulled into the book. So yeah, it was a very fun process. I remember struggling really hard with what I wanted vampires to look like, but I thought it would be very interesting to have a world where everyone sort of fed off of a life source, so yeah, it was very fun.
I love this. All right, so some new subjects. So let's talk about what has sparked joy over the past couple of years. What's been something that has been lighthearted and been fun, whether it's a book, writing, whatever project, maybe like it was something an escape from all the darkness that we have gone through.
Yeah, it's probably this whole process of just becoming a full-time author, like writing and becoming a full-time author, and my books catching, because it was a dream since I was 13. And during that process, when my book started to get pretty popular, I did lose my dad to COVID. And
sorry.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, it is what it is. And I think it gets harder when you see. I remember when I saw we had hit like, I don't remember, we hit the New York Times had this front page of like all these dots, and it was like, I don't know how many, and I thought it was all the people who died of COVID. And I thought, my dad is one of those. And it ruined my whole day. It's so weird how people at like the news and media, they're just trying to tell you like, this is the impact of COVID, and you see it and you're someone who was impacted by it, and it ruins your whole day. But writing and experiencing something that I had dreamed about my whole life was definitely the high point. And then on the flip side, my dad's not here because I would always tell him all of my successes. And it's like when I hit the USA Today bestselling list, I wanted to tell my dad, and I didn't have the same like excitement that I might have had if he was still alive. So that was very strange. So where I feel like I take the most comfort now is just in the fact that people read my book. Like you saying that you don't usually read the kind of books I write, but loving it, that is the epitome of like success for me. And so I always look for those people who like, your books got me into reading again. Your books, like, I've never read anything like this, like, but I loved it. Like, those things like make my entire day. Like, it motivates me to keep going, because everything about this is hard. Everything about 2020 and 2021, and now we're going into 2022. And so it's been an interesting journey for sure, but definitely readers keep me motivated, keep me going, and I just think that's the coolest thing, don't you? To like to have people start reading again, and it was your book that did it. That blows my mind. It's really cool.
Yeah, you're creating like voracious readers, like
I love it. I was a librarian for 5 years, and so I had a firm belief that there's a book out there for everyone. You just have to find it, and that's how I feel like these people found their book. And I just think that is the coolest thing. It's just the coolest thing.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's hard. So, and I'm glad you found some light. Like, you're doing major impact for those of us who are just like, we're isolating and not seeing anyone. And we're like, okay, this is the entertainment,
It really is.
This is an escape from all this other shit stuff that's happening. We're escaping to this. So, your book definitely was like, I was like in a weird funk this past weekend. I was like, okay, I'm isolating again because cases are high and all this stuff. And I was like, well, your book was like, I was sitting down and I was like, there's no distractions, and just allow me just to be immersed in a world that was like nothing, like no news, no crazy stuff, no social media. Like it was just like, okay, I'm in this world and I'm just like transported to vampires and to goddesses and to political intrigue. And it was just like, that was such a fucking good experience.
I'm so glad. I really, you never know. You never know how anyone is going to respond to any book you write. And I got really anxious with this one because it is a creation, like literally from the ground up from my head. And it's a little bit different than A Touch of Darkness because, I based all that off of Greek mythology. So I thought, well, how will this go? Like, I don't know, like, but it's so cool to, I've always loved high fantasy. So it's so cool to create something that people can still relate to. And also, I do think my books are good for people who haven't quite made it into like high fantasy, like high world building, because I don't do the I don't know, I just don't do hard. I do world building, but I feel like in a way that's not overwhelming. And I think some world building can be overwhelming, especially when we talk about high fantasy. High fantasy is kind of a scary word for some people, but yeah, it's really cool. I just gosh, I'm so grateful. I'm just really grateful. So
awesome. So you're a former librarian, and so I'm assuming that you have book recommendations to share with our listeners. Just as a former book pusher.
book pusher.
Yeah.
It was so interesting. Reader's Advisor used to be my favorite thing ever. Like I love finding people new reads. But the book that I was just recommending, I used to recommend all the time, and I didn't forget about it. I just moved on to other book recommendations, but it came back recently. It is YA, but it was like a sexy YA. It's called The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer, and it's by Michelle Hodkins, I think is her last name. I love it so much. And the other book I always recommend, because it's kind of my early fantasy romance, was Poison Study by Maria V. Schneider. Have you ever read that?
No, I have not. Now I'm
like, oh my God. It's so good. It doesn't have a lot of spice, but it was like one of my first like fantasies with a sex scene. And I was like scandalized, not really, but but it was so good. It was definitely one of the first books I read that had like a brooding male character, like and I loved it so much. I'm looking at my Kindle right now because I never pull things off the top of my head. And a book that I love that is like spicy high fantasy is Master of Crows by Grace Draven. It's one of my favorite high fantasy romances. And she was self-publishing and writing in this category like back in like 2012, probably earlier than that. But I always thought that was super impressive because she was writing in this genre before it got super, super popular.
Yeah.
I'm about to start hold on, I don't know if this is the first book, Kingdom of Exiles, which is by Maxim M. Martineau. I can't say her last name, but I love her as a person. She's a really great author. And I was on a Comic-Con panel with her in Chicago, and she's fantastic. I love her so much. But she has two types. The series that she wrote is both adults. There's one for adults and one for like young adults. Mm-hmm. So that's a little confusing, but should definitely check her out. And then A Cursed Kiss by Jenny Hickman. That is a really cool Gaelic like fantasy romance. And I haven't read a lot of Gaelic like mythology retelling. So I think that one is a really good option. And have you heard of any of these?
Yeah, this is like brand new world. You're just like introducing me to like something to binge on right now. Like,
yes.
Yeah.
I usually read tons of like one of my favorite books this year, and it was this year. I haven't been able to read in a little while because I've been writing. But one of my favorite, I love Regency and Highland romance. And I read The Beast of Bestwick by Amelia Howard, and I loved it. And it had like the main male is named Thane, and he has scars, and he's just like the broody male, like, you know, and possessive. And, you know, in reality, like the possessiveness is like weird in like, you know, our real lives, but in the books, it's like hot. So I love that. That was really good. And yeah, I think I don't know what else. I'm not sure.
I think you gave a good list for fantasy starters, historical, Highlander, you know, Beauty and the Beast, you know, retelling.
It's all romance. I don't read anything but romance now. I'm really,
yeah. I love this. So tell us where you can find you online.
Oh, I'm mostly active on Instagram, and I have to look because I actually forget my handle. It's author Scarlett and Clair. So I'm mostly active there, and I'm on Twitter too. Not much. I have a TikTok. TikTok's important because that's where I teach you how to pronounce all the names in my book. Yeah, I have a Facebook group called Cult of Scarlett. It's interesting. Lots of interesting things happen there. And then if you would like, I do have a newsletter, and in that I'm going to send out a newsletter around, you know, at the end of this week. And it will have a short story featuring Adrian and Isolde that I'm really excited about. So
gotta sign up for your newsletter.
I know. Well, everyone always asks for like holiday short stories, and it's so hard because I'm an idiot, and I'm not an idiot, I guess, but I just, you know, like everyone's like, do a Halloween short for Hades and Persephone. I'm like, okay, but Halloween is a pagan holiday, and this is cultures based off Greece, like ancient Greece. So they, you know, so I had to go through that whole thing. So I had to go do a ton of research to figure out what they would celebrate that's even close to Halloween. And the same with this. I had to make up a holiday. And I was like, it can't be Yule because Yule has like connections to, you know, religion, and it just couldn't be Yule. So I did my own thing. So hopefully you like it.
I'm running to sign up. So thank you. Thank you, Scarlett, for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. Today's episode's partner is Libra FM. If you're an audiobook listener, then you should add Libra FM as your go-to source for paid audiobooks. Libra FM makes it possible for you to buy audiobooks through your local bookstore. Memberships start at $14.95, and they also have great sales for romance audiobooks each month for $3.99, thanks to the Kiss Club. To sign up for Libra FM, please visit whattoreadnextblog.com/LibraFM. You will receive a free audiobook when you sign up for a monthly subscription. If you purchase a subscription through our link, you will be supporting the podcast at no cost to you. The What to Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Please visit frolic.media/podcast to discover new shows to tune in. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.